Suhasini. This time she's going to be talking us through the development priorities and directions for growth for Auroville, work that was recently done with her and the team on the board. Thank you, Suhasini.
So this is a follow-up of one of the other works that I presented yesterday, which was a land suitability analysis. And we took this up in 2019. So it was with the TDC of that time. We had a work order. Okay, nothing happens. So why did we do this? This was one of the questions that somebody asked last time. So I put this in today. Why do we need to identify our development priorities and set directions for growth? To prepare a detailed development plan with projects and annual budgets, you need two things. You need development policies and programs, and you need an urban plan with development controls and regulations. Without these two, you're not going to be able to do a DDP. But to have development policies and programs, you need to know what is your priority and what direction you want to develop. And to be able to do development controls and regulation, you need a perspective plan, which we have, and you need a land use plan, which has a legal statutory body, which was the study that we showed yesterday. How do we identify development priorities and growth? So first is that you take up a predetermined time frame of the past. So we did that we said we'll take up 2008 to 18. And we correlate the population growth and demographics to key sectors like the economy, basic needs, and social amenities. And using the baseline, we will identify where are our gaps. And with the projection of the population, we will know where we need to prioritize development. And the second thing is, of course, the directions of growth, which would be the framework based on the master plan and the galaxy concept and our priorities. This will enable the planners and the local bodies to prepare a development plan which has policies, programs, and projects embedded in it. Study status and timeline in January 2018, and then the MOU was signed in March 2019. So there was a little bit of a time lag between when we asked to do the study and when we were enabled to do the study. And the major part of the work of the data collection analysis was done by me, Harini, Manas, Vikram, and Martin Scheffler from that. But we had a big support team of people like Induja, Mood, and others. Without them, we couldn't have done it. And when the first part of the study was ready, we had a focus group of experts and persons from various fields and sectors of Auroville who were asked to give their opinion and input. So that happened in Jan 2020. So for over a period of 15 months, we worked on the study, and then we had the first focus group. Then we did, between Jan and October, we had a gap because of COVID and all these other things. So from October 2020 till March 2021, we did a series of consultations with education, housing, energy, economy, health, water, L'avenir, and Auroville Council. And after each consultation, we would get written inputs from them with questionnaires and other things that we collated and integrated into the study. And then the idea was that in February, we would have the presentation to the RA to show them what was emerging, which never happened. And then we would release the proposal, the study, which never happened, for the same reasons that the land use study didn't happen. So I'm going to just run through a few things like population growth. Now, it was very difficult for us to get data on Auroville population, because sometimes the resident service was overwriting on the same Excel sheet. Sometimes dead people were still retained. Sometimes live people were put into the wrong category. So it took us several months to go through their data, and finally only from 2011 to 2019 we could have a population data that was more or less accurate. 2007, 8, 9 we could not, because there was too much confusion. So we looked at from 11 to 18 what was the population. We realized that 2008, 1,741, 2018, 2,443. The decadal growth rate was 70%. Then we said, okay, if we say business as usual, nothing changes in Auroville, we continue the way we are, where will we be in 2028? But if we would align a few measures like our policies and programs, where would we reach in 2028? And if we say, no, everything is perfect and ideal in Auroville, but we take only our carrying capacity into account, which is both socioeconomic and cultural, because we took 7% growth rate as a carrying capacity for one simple reason. That means every 10 years, you would double your population. That means in 2028, every second person has been in Auroville less than 10 years. Living in a community where most of our regulations are actually by precedence and not written down, if you want to have a functioning community which has its social capital remaining intact, you cannot have more than 50% of the population here which has been here less than 10 years. So we then said, okay, 7% growth rate is where we cut off so that we still have a socio-economic carrying capacity that is in tune with our cultural carrying capacity. Then we looked at various sectors in terms of just the figures. We looked at master plan. Master Plan 2025 said that by 2010 we will be 15,000 people, and by 2025, that is in 3 years, we will be 50,000 people. And most of the Section 2 and Section 3 had taken this as a given and worked on it, which means that we would have 156% decadal growth rate. Okay? Then we looked at another thing that was published in 2004, which was Master Plan Directions for Growth, which was the kind of study we were trying to take up again. And they had said by 2008, we will be 5,000 people. And again, by 2025, we will be 50,000 people. But they had taken a decadal growth rate of 529%. But actually what happened in the 10 years of 2008 to 2018 is that we had a 70% growth rate. In 0 to 20 years, we had quite a good growth rate of 190%. Which you look at this, with that, it's not so amazing, but this could be because fertility rate in Auroville went up also, okay? It will be as simple as that, because 0 to 20 years are people who are dependent. You are investing in them in terms of care, education, social, and healthcare. So this is not the productive population. And 20 to 65 years, our decadal growth rate was 63%, and 65 and above, which is again a population that needs investment that you can't get too much out of. Then we looked at data from various areas like energy, from prosperity, from the budgets of different things that goes in from the central fund into Auroville, like where the investment was, and the GOI grants. And so we looked at where was the maximum growth rate and where the growth rate fell down and fell through. This is not very interesting in terms of finer debate points, because like if you look at 2,000% here, it's because maybe, you know, if you have one person and then in 10 years you have two people, it becomes 100% growth rate, okay? So this is only interesting in the overall picture of how Auroville has developed during those 10 years. We then looked at the three different sectors, which is the economy, the social amenities, and the infrastructure. And I'm just going to give you only certain part of the economy thing. We looked at three different things. Net value added. What is net value added? So suppose I run a company which has a turnover of 100 rupees this year. And after I have paid my taxes and other things, after I have paid my expenditure of the suppliers and other thing, I still have 70 rupees, but I have not yet paid my salaries, because that is value addition. Employment of people is value addition. Investment into the tools and machinery is value addition. So value addition is basically the value that you add in terms of human capital and assets. So we looked at, after paying for the work done, what is the value added in Auroville's economy by all the different economic activities, which means the units, the services, the central fund, and also the other activities that are just going out and doing consultancies and stuff like that. So when we looked at the net value added, there is a gradual growth rate. But when we look at surplus before contribution, you see that it's actually almost stable. So that means the profitability of our economic sector in terms of just, how do you say, capital generated after you pay off everything is not changing so much. But then, so with Harini, we set up certain standards where he said if it is less than 25, it's low, 0.25 to 0.5 is moderate, and over 0.5 is high. And we looked at employment also, how much employment was created, and here we did not look at the employment generated in the local area, but actually employment generated within Auroville in terms of maintenances and number of Aurovillians employed, units which are commercial, and this one is commercial plus service sector, taking into account also the central fund. So projecting based on 2008 to 2018, we wanted to see what would be the percentage of increase of population that can be absorbed in our income generating units so that we can pay for the development of the city by having livelihood that has a certain impact in terms of economy. I can see from the faces that they're glazing over, so I'm going to jump on this. And so we looked at the commercial sectors, employment, productivity. So here, for example, that's one of the things that we discovered when we were doing it. I mean, I discovered at least that I cannot compare the data of Auroville to the data of this country, which would be the best thing to do, because the way activities are clubbed by our FAMC and others is not the same way that the activities are clubbed under the Indian economic thing. For some reason, architecture and construction is synonymous. Construction is a completely different sector. Architecture is in a completely different sector when you look at India and the world. But in Auroville, to make it simple for us spiritual beings, we say they are one and the same, okay? So we can't even look at what's happening. And we also look at the fact that most people have this thing that architecture and construction is a huge money-making business. So we looked at it in the sense of what is happening, and we realize that it is actually has a ratio of surplus to net value added is in the sector of low. In reality, it's not even medium. The net value added to surplus in architecture and construction is pretty low in Auroville. Eateries was one that was doing very well, and guest houses. Okay. But that was because between 2008 and 2018, Pondicherry tourism took off really well. They actually invested a lot in it, and we had a spillover from their planning that benefited us. And handicrafts with maroma and handicrafts without maroma, because it's a huge difference. I'm going to try to focus only on the output and not on all these statistics as far as we go. So when we had then the analysis by the team that was engaged in doing the study, well, the few outputs that came up was the ratio of surplus generated to net value is low to moderate in almost all sectors. Okay? And employment of Aurovillians in commercial unit is not in proportion to the population growth. So our population growth is much higher than the employment generated for the Aurovillians. There's a lack of access to capital and limited developed sites, and it's a very tedious procedure to obtain building permissions, which prevents expansion of existing units and discourages startup. There's a lack of legal and administrative support to meet the required regulatory conditions, which is actually affecting a lot of units, because people start units because they have a certain creativity, they have a certain elan, and they're innovative, but they're also asked to do a lot of other peripheral things that they have no clue about. And they get overwhelmed with their GST and their labor thing and other thing. So they do not want to grow, because they realize the more they grow here, the more they're going to be caught spending most of the time in that. So a lot of units in Auroville are 2-3 person units, and they want to remain there, which is a pity. And financial aid for supported skill development is missing. There's a lack of sufficient housing stock for Aurovilians, non-Aurovilians, which is an impediment to engaging citizen. Then we had the focus group discussions, which the output was, these are the main people who participated and kind of steered it. Encourage economic development for income generation, development in tourism, food and knowledge, and access to capital and HR development, especially with shared spaces as incubators to promote economic development. We put all that together where we had an output from the working groups which are involved in economy in Auroville, which is FAMC, BCC, Working Committee, ABC, ABS, GI Group, and all that. And they had their inputs. And based on the 3 levels of consultation, we came up with what needs to be the policy that needs to be integrated or embedded into our economic development, and the kind of programs that should be taken up to put these policies into practice, and the kind of projects that would be embedded within these programs. We did that with water. Water was a very difficult area to get data because of variations. Some of the wells have pumps which are inefficient. Some of the wells which have, don't even have a metering, but either for energy or for how much water is put out. Some of them bill based on timing. Some of them bill based on energy. So all we could do was take up the major wells in the city area with the help of AVS, where we were sure about the pumping data that was correlated to the energy data, and looked at where was the growth. So if you look at this, the low consumption is green, that is 0 to 500 kilowatt hours, and then we medium and high, and then looked at in 2018 what was the consumption of energy. So in some areas the consumption went higher, and we can only assume that it's because there was more development in these areas, and then we correlated it to look at with Google Maps if there were more buildings and other things. Some places, yes, there was more development, but in some places, amazingly, there was not so much development. Like, for example, here. But we don't know why the consumption went up. Nobody could explain. So there are things like that. So we then looked at actual consumption per capita for water related from energy, how it would grow in 10 years if we didn't do any changes, and how we can actually control the consumption if we would adopt certain sustainable policies. Water study group, we came up with this as our output of our study. Then we had focus group discussions with these people, and they gave their output. And then we had consultation with the working groups that are involved in water management in Auroville, and they gave their input, and then we came up with policies, programs, and projects for water. Similarly, we did for energy within the city area, and looked at our energy consumption, projection for energy consumption, what needs to be put into place in terms of sustainable measures, output of the study, output of the focus group, output of the consultation with the working groups, and policies, programs, and projects for energy. Health, similarly, we did that for both the health center and for Sante. Looked at doctor-nurse, patient to doctor-nurse ratio using WHO standards, and looked at the management and social structure to support our health services, to deal with epidemics, disasters, and other things. And the health fund, what is happening with the health fund, where are the gaps? And this was quite interesting because the health fund is actually a one-person show. We are all sitting here in the room, very confident that we will be taken care of when we are sick. But actually it's a one-person show. A mother with 3 children is running our health fund, okay? Plus doing 2 other jobs. And she's amazing. She could always find time to help us with the data. And there's Nico, who just enters the bills into thing. One of the things that we found is that the contribution to expenditure margin is not sustainable. But we cannot go higher with the contribution because our maintenances in real value compared to 2008, the maintenances of Aurovillians have dropped almost 20% by 2018. So the purchasing power parity of the maintenance that we were getting in 2008 was buying us 20% more than what it was buying us in 2018. Okay, so actually we were living with a lower maintenance by 2018 in Auroville. So there was no question of paying higher health fund. And we also found out that the data entry of the bills was not correlated to the type of medical intervention. So we didn't know who was having chronic issues, who was having just accidents, who was, no idea. So we can't plan medical expenditure and then correlate it to our contribution. No? Similarly, there was no categorization that was available for the tertiary and other medical care in the region. So, if somebody got sick and they went to one of the health facilities in Auroville and then they had diagnostics to be done, there was no way to correlate which of the medical facilities in this region would give the best care for the kind of treatment or diagnostics that was needed. And given the fact that most of the private clinics have diagnostic machines and EMI that needs to be used, you are going to be billed for diagnostics that is not needed also. So we end up paying bills which are no counseling and no established fund for emergency health services. So health study, the output of the health study, and then the focus group out study, then the consultation with all the area people working in the health sector, the output of it in terms of policy, program, and projects. We did that with education. So we looked at the enrollment for the various age groups, the age bands of 0 to 5, 5 to 15, 15 to 20. And we looked at the enrollment in 2008-9 and the enrollment in 2017-18. And we looked at, in terms of the projection, what we have for 2028 and where is the gap in terms of the facilities needed. Here we are only looking at the capital investment. We are not looking at teachers, okay? We have enough space in schools. We have enough space on campus to have enough classroom space to absorb the number of kids that will be born and need to go to school in the next 10 years, or number of teenagers who need to go to high school or middle school. And we looked at building capacity. So if you look at between the two, the blue is the expected enrollment and the green is the capacity to absorb the enrollment. So we do have enough space in our schools. The gap is actually teaching staff, management staff, administrative staff. It's not building. Education output, the analysis by the team that did the work, and then with SIRE, and then with all the different working groups, including TDC, and the policies, programs, and projects that emerged out of it. We did the same with housing. Housing, we could have data only for certain years. So like we had 2008-9, financial 2008-9, 12-13, 15-16, 16-17, and 18-19. So we looked at the number of beds that were allocated in each of these years. That means we took number of people rather than square meter or number of building units. We said how many people could be housed. So, for example, in 2008-9, and this is housed using Auroville's resources. We are not counting people who could self-finance their houses. We are only counting what is Auroville's capacity to house its inhabitants. So in 2008-9, they could actually provide housing for 12 people. And by 18-19, they could provide housing for 204. And we looked at what was the demand, because it's very nice to be able to say we house so many people. So in 2008-9, there were 49 people who needed housing and they could house 12. And in 2018-19, there were 326 people who had requested housing. So 122 did not get housed. So this was the gap between our capacity and our need. And we also looked at the source of funding. When it says 100%, it's 100% generated within Auroville. And this is generated between two different sources. There's a solidarity fund. If there are people who are able to finance their houses, they are paying a certain contribution that goes to housing service, which then uses it for repair maintenance and also housing people. So it's in 15-16 that only 59% of the funds came from Auroville, and in 2018-19, 47% came from Auroville. But otherwise, most of the time, it was Auroville financing its own housing. And we looked at the output of the study from the housing data, and we looked what we got from the focus group, and then the consultation with the working groups, and prepared the policy programs and projects. So after we did all this, we had a discussion with a small group of people that we put together. So there was a group of 7 or 8 people that we picked out from the community who had a certain capacity to connect dots and do lateral thinking, and ask them, like, why do you think we are where we are and how did it happen? Okay. There are 7 major points that emerged. First was the lack of integrated data collection and management framework to access comprehensive and accurate information needed for planning. So when somebody says, make me this road and Auroville just needs that, I say, based on what? Like, I had a long conversation with Anu, who had come home a few months ago, and she said, when we do the Crown Road, things will happen. So I asked her, what are these things and how will it happen? And what are these things? How are they going to happen? No, because the road is the thing that has prevented things from happening. That was the thing. And when I'm looking at where is the data? Okay. And the other thing is that the policy planning procedure is extremely tedious in Auroville. Actually, we don't do policy. Every time we have something happening, we come up with certain regulation, and de facto it becomes a policy. And it's fragmented because each working group works as a silo, and they are doing things whatever they can within the cycle of selection, election of membership that happens over a 2 to 5 years system. And so there's a lack of alignment in the policies and regulation, which is pushing people in the working groups to still continue to work as silos. In a way, it's like a self-fulfilling cycle. The more they work in isolation, the more Auroville is fragmented, and more there is kind of competition for resources. So the more people feel threatened, and more they work as silos. And this cycle has become such a normal practice that to even get some of the working groups that have interrelated activities to sit down for a consultative process with us required diplomacy of a level that I think without Harini and others being involved, we couldn't have got them in the same room, So working groups are unable to engage, retain cell HR for planning, utilities, food production, because the whole fragmentation that is happening because of the lack of alignments of policies and then there's no capacity building program, because we look at people with goodwill and popularity as 2 of the main capacity to be in a working group. If nobody objects to you, and you have never done anything wrong that is in public memory, you are enabled to be in a working group. Okay? But which is fine. But then afterwards there's no program so that they learn public governance, administration. There's nothing. There's nothing as a supportive system. And then policy planning is taken up by the same people who get nominated. And then there's a systemic bias that immediately gets into the system because they do not have the institutional memory that has been put in either with proper filing system or continuity of administration that allows them to understand why this problem is happening today and what led to that fact. And output of that, of course, is the Buddy network and Raj. Because these things are all a result one after another. Nothing stands alone. We don't have that, then this will happen. If this happens, we are bound to do that. And then we run around blaming each other, which is very nice, because then we go back into the loop saying you are the one who is to blame for what is wrong here. But then we said, okay, we will examine sector-wise the policies that we have and correlate them to the programs of various sectors to see which policy actually has the most positive impact on programs of the other sectors. So we did that, and then we had a ranking system. So if you were like for the economy, the regulation to set up venture capital fund, amendment to the housing policy and the maintenance policy, and amendment to the Auroville contribution policy, it would help not only the economics, the education program, and housing program. So this policy that emerged in the economic has a positive output in those two. Similarly, water, we realize, also has positive output. So we went through all the different sectors, and then we looked at all the different programs and how they would impact the projects. Nobody can read, so you just have to trust that what I'm reading is what's there. And this was the output of the evaluation matrix. We said policy change in the economic system with targeted programs is a catalyst needed to fuel education, housing, employment sector to match the projected population growth. We really need policy change in our economic sector. We need to have developed land with assured water supply infrastructure essential for growth in all sectors, because we look at our development in terms of land use today, and we realize one of the major constraints is water. And housing development cannot be a silo. It has to be an output of the economic and social development sectors. So financing, tenure, type of housing cannot be worked with separately by housing board and housing services. They have to work together with other sectors. Education, especially skill development, needs to be linked with the economic sector with supported programs for effectivity. A lot of stuff that is happening within Auroville, I mean, I know Lucas is working the scholarship fund with the whole group. There are other people working on skill development, and I talked to Manas. There are gaps where there's a demand, but it cannot be met, you know. But there's a demand from the student saying, okay, if I study that because that's what I'm interested in, that's where I think I can contribute most to Auroville. Most of them are not able to actually get the financing or the resources to do that. But then when you ask the units what are the skills that they need, I would say that the overlay doesn't match. So there is a lack of communication between the kind of skills that we need to develop Auroville and the kind of skills that the youth wants to develop. And that needs to be looked at. Project sanctioned with public funding needs to be an output of programs embedded in the overall development plan, which is stating the obvious. And I think that's it.
This is not related to your presentation only, but it might be an important question in how we are working. The crucial aspect of the data right now, I tried working myself, I'll be very short in that. I tried working in one of the working groups, the Town Development Council, and it was frustrating to see how you just can't make sense of the data that you were given. There are multiple copies and you don't know what is right, what is wrong, because they are different. How do you see, what are your thoughts on it? Like, how can this be? Is it a cleaning up of that needed? I don't know if my question makes sense, but what do you think about this problem?
There's a past, present, and future to everything, no? We have a certain system in place which is demanding that whoever sits in the working group undertakes 3 different works at the same time without any capacity building, which is that they would be decision makers, they would be administrators, and they would also manage the implementation of whatever that working group has to do, right? And culturally, what has happened in Auroville is there's a lot of mistrust. Nobody trusts anybody else. That's why we go around selecting people of goodwill who have public popularity, not people with capacity or people with ability, okay? And we do not also take into account the fact that the diversity of needs and issues and challenges in Auroville are an output of our own history. So we continuously put in regulatory mechanism to deal with issues that are arising due to a certain dysfunction in the past and project it into the future as the resolution for whatever we have learned. There's no forward planning in saying, look, we have a history which has created a governance system, which has a certain output, which is creating a dissonance in our decision making, which has eroded our social capital. we need to deal with that. And we put a kind of marker there. But if you want to avoid that, we need to do a forward planning. While we are resolving this, we need to set up a system. So both have to happen parallelly, but there has to be a transition period. Now, this is where public policy and planning come in. And we do not undertake that. When you're dealing with difference of perception or a difference of objectives, there are two different things that's happening. There is preference. People have preferences, and that leads to prejudice. So I can be talking about a certain thing which may be rational, functional, supported by data, but if you have a preference, you're automatically having a prejudice in accepting the output of any data. And you would actually use statements which are very, paralysis of analysis. We are not the same like the rest of the world. We are very different, so we should not work this way. Fine, we are different, we are not the thing, we should just go ahead and do it. But then 10 years down the line, when somebody comes and says, you're still there, actually not just still there, you are 3 steps backward when you look at the data. Again, the same reasons are rolled out. And they are rolled out based on a belief system. You can discuss when it's a preference. You can discuss when it is actually the system of data analysis is varying. You can discuss and come to some kind of agreements on how you proceed if there is a process of looking at things as we all have different preferences, but we can adapt. But you cannot have a discussion when you go by a system of belief. And this is where the problem is. I mean, I consider that I only knew about 3 groups of people who were people of the book. But then I realized in the last 25 years, there's a 4th group of which I'm part. I'm the 4th group of the people of the book. So there's Judaism, there's Christianity, there's Islam, and now there's Aurovillism, which is another people of the book. And there's no way to have a discussion and debate. So every person with capacity, goodwill, popularity joins a working group. And if they are not delusional, they very quickly leave, you see. And we are burning out good people with imagination and creativity because of the system. And as long as we just deal with belief systems and not say my belief is based on a certain preference or my belief is based on progress, and so I'm ready to discuss these things. With the diversity that we have and the amount of creative people that we have, we are going to be running around in circles for a long time to come. And that no data can actually get us out of that. No road can get us out of that. And no book can get us out of that. So we might, 2025, we will come up with a new amended master plan. That will be the new book, which will be the St. James Bible. Okay?
Just to add to it, so would this be an idea, a crucial thing, that accountability has to come with the working group that you are in?
Public, how can you hold people accountable? I mean, you're holding people accountable for things that they cannot take responsibility for. I mean, I tell you very frankly, I do not have a problem with the present people in TDC because they cannot be held accountable for what they're doing. You can only be held accountable for something that you're doing if you are able to take the responsibility for it. People are pushed left, right, and center to do things which they don't need to do. They don't want to do even sometimes. Nobody is accountable here. And you can't be accountable if you are not allowed to take responsibility, and you can't take responsibility if you are not allowed to actually think about certain things and come up with rationalized output. You have to only do that. Who is going to be responsible then?
I'm, as usual, really overwhelmed by the amount of work that you do and by the speed that you present it. And I think I'm not alone here from the people who are supposed to dreamweave or start the dreamweaving that then is continued by Rajiv and his team. The data which you have collected, does it support actually that drive in that one particular development that we are doing it right now? I almost heard you that the data that we have is that, for example, the road system that we have is perfectly feasible for the next few years to come.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So I don't really know what in this room then to make with all of that data which you have taken so much energy to collect.
Because I'm crazy, I keep doing these things and then just get, it's also a good learning experience. You get to know what's happening where and why. So you understand the larger systems at work, and you start to actually even have sympathy for people that are working based on a belief system. You realize that it takes imagination to make changes. And when people who lack imagination sit in decision-making places and out of a belief system decide things, we as a community are equally responsible. That's all I can say. And that's how I can empathize with the people who work with a belief system, because I realize it takes imagination to integrate change, and to take responsibility for your imagination is a big step.
And another realization is probably that we have to have an open discussion on our maintenance system and the assumption that it works, while we all know it does not, which creates such a huge kind of shadow economy, which we all live with.
But you see, that's where I disagree with you in that sense. The BCC has been doing, over the last 3-4 months, they've sent out questionnaires, they've been asking people. And if you look at the participation, it is not enough in terms of numbers to even derive a baseline. We like to say that this should be done, but when people who do it are not able to communicate enough the seriousness of the output that they want to get out, that the participation is extremely low. BCC has been doing it. I think sometime in November they sent out the 3rd form on your maintenance and your expenditure and everything. Huh? No, they didn't.
The BCC said they were not really fully part of it. Maybe we are also all too shy to talk about money and all. And
thank you very much. Given all that you presented and all that's actually been said since, what are your suggestions for the Dreamweavers? What are your suggestions for our friends who are going to try and help the DDP preparation out of this time right now, and maybe more generally, because there's so much out of the scope, I feel, for this room that we also have to address in parallel. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how we go forward.
Okay. You see, the idea of the taking up the crown as part of the dreamweaving process, I'm fully supportive of it, and that's why I'm standing in here, for 2 very simple reasons. One is that if we can, on a level of integrating 3 different tendencies in Auroville, or let's say 3 different groups of people. One is the architects, then the others are the planners, and the third is the people. People who can do everything. Architects have been doing planning in Auroville, and I suppose it's a kind of a legacy because Roger was an architect, and mother told an architect, please plan my city, and he made a concept which is a very formal interpretation of a development in terms of building masses, rather than looking at the givens that she gave with the charter and the socio-economic aspect, and 1954 when she talked about the city that she wanted to do, even 27 or 24, I don't know these dates, when in Golconda. She has been talking about many things that she wants when she was talking about this experiment of the yoga in an urban context, no? So we had an architect doing it, and then we had architects taking it up, and then we had architects discussing it, and then people saying architects are bad, so then the discussion even became worse. It's because architects fight, and that's why we don't develop. And so I really hope with this Dreamweavers that we can actually integrate that architects do certain things, planners do certain things, and people do certain things, and unless all these 3 things come together, we don't really have development, you know. So I'm supportive of that. And the second thing is, I would like to bring the question of time on the table. Somehow, whenever we do planning or design or we're doing participation, we never look at time as an important element of development. If we don't work with time, what you end up doing is either overshooting in terms of target setting or misjudging the kind of capacity building that you can do. And then in both cases, it leads to a planning failure. And then that planning failure, rather than being put on the lack of integrating the temporal values in planning, is put on the professional capacity of the people who are involved, because it's always easier to blame a person than a policy, you see. And the third thing that I would really like is that somehow, if this thing works, we can show that it's okay to have a belief system and also accept change, that you're not betraying your belief by adapting to change. And that would be the most wonderful thing that the dream weaving could do. I don't care about the drawings. If we can actually establish at the end of these 7 weeks, change is not a betrayal of belief. That's all.